but we are going to have a little interview today. So it is so great to have Isabel and Marissa with us. Many of you may know Isabel. She's been around the church for 4 or 5 years, something like that. Marissa's been around the church for about 5 or 6 months. So we actually rehearsed in the church earlier this week, and it was the first time that she had been in the church on the chancel steps. So she started coming to us during the pandemic, and so I think you're probably more comfortable out here, right? So,
I am. I love it out here.
So it's a little daunting to go inside. So today we hear about the Good Shepherd, and it's a beautiful, beautiful image of who Jesus is. But it may be kind of foreign to us. When you drive around San Antonio, you don't see a lot of shepherds and a lot of sheep around. But if you drive through the Holy Land, you do. You do see a lot of shepherds, even today. And it's really interesting because you can tell a shepherd. When the shepherd calls out the names of the sheep, they come running to him and they gather around him. And so it's an image that would be very familiar to those who were in the midst of Jesus, but are probably less familiar to us about what that means. And so that's my first question for you all. What does that mean? Jesus is our good shepherd. What does that mean for you all? And share that with us.
Well, honestly, when I think of the Good Shepherd, I don't think of the cute, pretty Easter card.
Come on!
I know. I honestly think more of the rugged, hardened, somewhat possibly scary individual that has to go out into the wilderness and protect his flock. Has to do hard things, has to do dangerous things. This wasn't a glamorous job. This wasn't a safe job. This was an important job. And that brings me a lot of comfort because this might shock some of you, but I can be a very stubborn and willful child. And yeah, I know. But I need a shepherd that can bring me back from my own stupidity and can trudge out to the darkness and do hard things.
Yeah. So being a shepherd is really hard. That's why I'm a priest. I'm not a shepherd. So that job just seems so much more difficult than shepherding people, like in everyday life in San Antonio. So Marissa, how about you? What does a shepherd mean to you?
I probably think about it a little bit more in the pretty sense. I think of two things when I think of the Good Shepherd. The first is God's unconditional love for his flock, and then the second is the unity of the flock in themselves. And a story that I think of is about 2 weeks before the pandemic hit Milan. I was living there. And I had a friend that I went to school with, and we went to this adorable Anglican church just a mile north of the Duomo for a choir performance that night. And we had a different choir director that day, and he came in, he started speaking. The whole church was in English, so it just felt like this little piece of home to me in the midst of the Italian that I don't speak well at all. And he started talking. He was like, yeah, and I'm from South Carolina, which was just where I had gone to school a year earlier. And that just felt like this very sacred space for me. And we just sang for an hour and stood and clapped and glorified God. And so it just felt like this unity in the midst of this space that I was not that familiar with. And that's just the way the church feels to me.
Yeah, it's awesome. The world is much smaller when we start thinking about how grand God is and how God can pull us together. Another thing that the shepherd does is we're reminded that the Good Shepherd knows us by name. And so, Marissa, what does that mean to you, that the shepherd knows us by name, and how is that important to the outreach that we do?
So when we're born on this earth, we're called by name, basically from the moment that we step here. And then when we're baptized into our faith, we're called by our name again, and then into our confirmation. And so this is this ongoing thing that we're called. And so that's where we form relationships, is with the names. Everybody sitting here has name tags on right now. And I've only been here for 6 months, and when I was looking for an Episcopal church to join, I was looking for outreach. So I got on Google, Episcopal churches in San Antonio, came across Christ Episcopal Church, and then saw Sidewalk Saturday, and was like, that's where I'm gonna go. So came here, got to worship with you all, and then decided I was gonna join Sidewalk Saturday. And I've moved a lot in the last 3 years. So I was like, well, that's going to be something I'm going to have to come and learn people's names. And it's not always the easiest thing to just jump in and be a part of that community. And I walked in and everyone had name tags on. And that relationship is immediate, right? It feels like the doors are wide open for you to come and be part of that. And it's incredible.
It's awesome. We hadn't always done name tags, and so you came after we instituted that name tag part of Sidewalk Saturday, and it did build immediate trust. So what you saw was what we were hoping that would happen, and so that's awesome. That's something that we did really does work. So it's great. Good affirmation. I'm appreciative of that. So we also know too that the shepherd, and you mentioned this a little bit already, Isabel, that the shepherd sometimes has to venture out into the wilderness because we like to stray, right? We like to go on our own path and take off on our own. And so the lost sheep, the gospel today doesn't really talk a whole about a lot of the lost sheep, but in other passages where Jesus talks about being the good shepherd, he talks about leaving the 99 to go find the one and bring the one back into the fold. How does that relate to what we do in outreach and in your own life?
Well, I think it depends on how we define outreach. So is outreach a collection of goods and services that we provide to fill a gap and possibly address temporary pain, even though it might feel permanent? Or is outreach a set of tools that God has given us so that we can love his people fully? And I think we'd all agree that it's the second, because we're here this morning. But that begs the question, what does that even look like? And I think it has to do with listening first, with respecting the dignity and the agency of the people you've come into contact with and the people that God's placed in your path, to really understand the sorrow that they're carrying and the pain and the anger and the hurt. And when you realize that you're all part of the same flock, you understand that sorrow might be sorrow you're trying to put down. It might be anger that you've dealt with, but that you recognize and you understand intimately. And at that moment, it just becomes a matter of going, hey, I recognize this corner of the wilderness, and I know someone who helped me come inside. Would you like me to show you the path that he showed me?
That's awesome. And so it is relationships. It's all about relationships. We know that, and that's what Sidewalk Saturday is all about, but that's really what all of our outreach initiatives are, is about building relationships with the community. Yeah, we do provide goods and services, but it's the hope and salvation that we find in Christ Jesus and that love that we're sharing with others. And that's what it means to be a shepherd. So the gospel today talked to you about the hired hand. And it's really interesting in just kind of taking a look at the juxtaposition of a shepherd versus a hired hand. The hired hand is just hired to make sure that all the sheep make it through the night, right? I mean, it's basically, it's a job, right? And just keep them safe. Doesn't really know them, doesn't really quite care about them, is really wanting the paycheck at the end of the evening or at the end of the day. But a shepherd is much different. And so what does that look like this is a question for both of you all. And I think I have Isabel going first. So what does it look like in real concrete terms, the difference between hired hand and shepherding when it comes to our outreach that we do here?
So one of my favorite things about Sidewalk Saturday morning, and I really hope y'all come out, it's this oddly, beautifully choreographed chaos, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
And everyone kind of has their little pocket of the building that they feel the most comfortable in, and I think we're really good at meeting people where their skills are and finding a home for them in the pavilion. But sometimes you need to move, and sometimes the Spirit calls you to check on somebody, and I've seen it happen so many times. One instance in particular, we've got a friend that comes pretty regularly. He can show up, all sorts of giggles and joy and funny and odd stories and lots of eye contact, or he can show up just looking like he's carrying the weight of the world and agitated and angry and assuming that the entire pavilion is mad at him and that he's done something wrong. And on the morning I'm thinking of, he was in the agitated state and the sorrowful state, and going through the lines, going through the different stations that we have available for our friends, and I I saw one of our ministers, one of y'all, just leave their post wordlessly, seamlessly, got backfilled and everything, and walked out to the middle of the lawn and met him and got on his level and asked questions and genuinely wanted to understand what the cause of that agitation was. Within minutes, his entire spirit and demeanor had changed. And that's not a hired hand, that's a shepherd.
Amen. Marissa, how about you?
I think the difference between the hired hand and the shepherd is the hired hand works for the wage and the shepherd works from their heart. And I think 2020 was a year where I don't think we did anything for 52 weeks. And we did Sidewalk Saturday for 52 weeks. There were ministers out for 52 weeks. And I have a story as well from our team. So we had a friend in the community that came and their shoes were completely torn up. And within 2 minutes of them being there, we had a minister, also one of you all, down on their knees, taking off their old shoes and replacing their shoes and socks. And it was just seamless. And that stuff happens every week. It's just, we are just really part of that community, and we really want you guys to be a part of that as well.
That's awesome. It is truly a gift, what you all do, and what you do, Marissa and Isabel. And it's not about what we do, but it's who we are, and we are shepherds also. So the good shepherd is in us and works in us, and we are now out in the community shepherding others. And that means sometimes that we get down on our knees and we replace socks and shoes. At other points, it means that people come to me and say, I would love to have prayers. And even in the midst of the pandemic, when we weren't supposed to be within 6 feet of each other, a hand on the shoulder and extend it as far as you can, and praying for somebody meant the world to somebody. And so that's who we are and what we do. The shepherd is working in us, and we are serving God's sheep that he places in front of us, and it's a beautiful thing. And so I too want to invite you. I know that we stood up earlier and there was a lot of people standing up that they're involved with outreach. We want to make that 100%. We want everyone in the congregation to be a part of outreach in some form or fashion. There's a job for everyone, no matter what your skill level is, no matter what your comfort level is, and we will help you along in that. We are all shepherds. We're all disciples. We want you to come and see what the outreach is here at Christ Church. And ultimately, you'll say, I want to follow that. I want to abide in that and remain in that because it is transformational. Let's give Isabel and Marissa a round of applause. Thank you all.